What would you do if after giving everything to your company for over 3 decades, they repaid you by cutting you out? 27 days before your pension vested. My name is Teresa Langford. I'm 59 years old, and for 31 years, I gave my life my loyalty, my late nights, my peace of mind to Norcross Systems in Denver, Colorado. I started when we were just 12 employees packed into a drafty converted warehouse. No stock options, no executive retreats, just grit code and coffee. I was 28 then, full of ideas and faith in corporate loyalty. Fast forward to the day it all ended with a single sheet of paper. Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated due to restructuring. Sign this by Friday or you get nothing. That's what Brian Kessler said as he slid the severance agreement across the desk, his perfectly manicured fingers flicking the page like it was a menu. The words barely registered. My ears rang. My fingers went cold. 31 years erased in a sentence. I stared at the mahogany desk where I'd negotiated compliance standards for billion-dollar contracts, and now I was expected to go quietly with a pat on the head and 12 weeks' pay. Brian was 39, Harvard MBA, fresh out of a boutique consulting firm with a reputation for streamlining. He'd only been CFO for 8 months, and from day one, he had eyed my department like it was a luxury line item on a spreadsheet he couldn't wait to zero out. "This is purely a business decision," he said, adjusting his designer tie. "Nothing personal. Nothing personal. I gave that company more than half my life. I protected it from federal investigations, regulatory fines, and legal disasters. But Brian..." He thought compliance was a buzzword, a department you could fold into legal and forget. He smiled when I didn't argue. That was his mistake. I nodded, once calm. "I understand." "Good," he said. "I appreciate your professionalism. The package is generous under the circumstances. 12 weeks of pay plus unused vacation. 12 weeks versus my full pension insulting. And he knew it. He knew I was 27 days away from vesting. Company policy explicitly protected employees within 30 days of retirement eligibility. I'd written that policy, and yet here I was, terminated with surgical precision. I placed the severance contract in my briefcase and stood slowly. I'll review this carefully. Remember, Friday is the deadline. After that, the offer expires. He said it like a threat. As I walked out of his office past the frosted glass Norcross logo in the lobby, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Gray hair, navy blazer, practical pumps. To him, I probably looked like every other woman nearing retirement expendable. What he didn't see was the fire he had just ignited. I returned to my office, the 14th floor corner suite I'd held for 8 years. My walls were lined with framed certificates from the DOT, the FAA, the FDA, commendations, awards, the lifeblood of corporate compliance. I'd kept the company clean through 4 mergers and 6 CEOs. I knew where the pressure points were: legal, operational, financial. And I knew something else. This wasn't restructuring. This was an execution, a quiet one. My assistant Patricia knocked on the door. Her face was pale. "Teresa, I just heard. Is it true?" I nodded. "My position's been eliminated. But you're so close to retirement," she whispered. "Can they even do that?" "Apparently they can." She hesitated in the doorway, her voice dropping. "This doesn't make sense. The Morrison audit is next month. The diet certification is due in 6 weeks. How are they going to manage?" "They'll figure it out," I said, cutting her off gently. But we both knew they wouldn't. Brian had no idea what my department actually did. He saw numbers and headcounts, not relationships, not nuance, not the late-night calls with regulators or the quiet deals I negotiated behind closed doors to keep Norcross out of the news. As I packed my desk, every item felt like a cut, a stress ball from the 2015 audit marathon, a Yellowstone photo of David and me, our anniversary trip before his cancer came back, and Ruth's coffee mug. She'd retired 6 months ago after 19 years as head of HR. She had warned me to watch out for the young ones who think experience is expensive. I didn't understand it then. I did now. 31 years of service fit neatly into one banker's box. It sat quietly in the trunk of my Honda Accord as I drove home down Spear Boulevard, the Denver skyline flickering in my rearview mirror. My thoughts raced. Brian's words echoed in my ears, the way he kept checking his watch, the way he glanced at his screen like he was following a script. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The moment I pulled into my driveway in Lakewood, my phone rang. Patricia. Teresa, she whispered. After you left, Brian came back to your office with 2 people. I've never seen them before. They spent an hour going through your files. They took everything, your documents, your laptop, even your desk calendar. My chest tightened. Did he say why he told me they were securing sensitive materials for the transition? But then I heard him on the phone afterward. He said something about Phase 2 and that the legal department needs to be insulated from liability. I sat in silence. Liability, Phase 2. Patricia. I said carefully, please don't talk to anyone about this conversation. Don't ask questions, just be cautious. Are you going to fight this? She asked. I didn't answer, because I already knew the answer. I wasn't just going to fight it. I was going to burn it down brick by brick, lie by lie. And Brian Kessler. He had no idea who he just tried to erase. But the next move wasn't mine alone, because someone from Norcross's past was about to become my greatest ally. The next morning, I made a call that would change everything. Ruth, it's Teresa. I need your help. Her voice, warm, familiar, cut through the storm cloud in my chest. Ruth Delgado had been my closest confidant at Norcross for over 15 years. She was sharp-principled, and when it came to HR, no one documented better than she did. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it was her. What's wrong? She asked immediately. I was let go yesterday. Brian Kessler eliminated my position. There was a beat of silence, then another. Wait. What, Teresa, your pension? 27 days. That's how close I was. 27 days from full vesting. The sound Ruth made wasn't just shock, it was recognition. Oh no, she whispered. I've seen this before. That's pension dumping. Her words sent a chill straight down my spine. I saw it happen at my last company before Norcross. They targeted senior employees right before their pension vested to save on long-term liability. And Brian, he asked questions about pension structures his second week on the job. I remember. I clenched the phone tighter. You think this was planned, I'd bet on it, she said grimly. In fact, when I retired, I kept copies of certain files, internal memos, emails, benefit policy drafts, just in case. Do any of them mention this strategy? Maybe. Come over tomorrow morning. We'll go through everything together. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying the moment Brian slid the contract across the desk, his voice cold and mechanical. I remembered his little glances toward his watch, toward the corner of his screen, as though someone had outlined this playbook for him. They thought I'd just walk away, but they had underestimated one thing, my memory. Norcross had trained me to be meticulous. I remembered everything. Every policy change, every leadership shuffle, every compliance update they'd ever tried to bury. I had helped design the internal protection clauses they were now trying to sidestep. And now I had Ruth armed with the kind of paperwork even a seasoned lawyer would kill for. Ruth lived in Westminster, about 20 minutes from my house. When I arrived the next morning, she had 2 cups of coffee ready and her office already covered in manila folders. What I found is worse than I thought, she said, quietly motioning to her desk. There were emails printed out, highlighted, handwritten notes in her careful script, internal memos, a spreadsheet that stopped me cold. These, she said, handing me a February email from Brian, are the smoking guns. The email sent to the executive team read, "Our analysis indicates that preventing certain high-tenure employees from reaching full vesting could significantly improve quarterly projections. Legal recommends structuring any necessary workforce adjustments as performance-based terminations or departmental consolidations to minimize exposure." My name wasn't in the email, but I didn't need to be. Another document was even more damning, a spreadsheet titled Pension Vesting Exposure, Q2 Risk. My name was highlighted in yellow, along with 3 others, James Morrison, IT, Sandra Williams, Sales, Robert Chen, Operations. Each name had a projected pension value next to it and a column labeled Strategic Offboarding Opportunity. "This is a hit list," I whispered. Ruth nodded. "They're spacing out the terminations to make them look like independent decisions." I felt sick. This wasn't just me. This was a coordinated purge of long-serving employees, people who had built Norcross with their own two hands now being treated like financial liabilities. Ruth wasn't done. She handed me another folder. "These are Brian's memos about your department. He's been laying the groundwork for months, documenting minor expenses, questioning standard training sessions, creating a paper trail." I scanned a document labeled Operational Efficiency Analysis, Compliance Department. In it, Brian argued that compliance responsibilities should be transferred to legal for a projected savings of $214,000 annually. He wrote, "Compliance is a redundant function that can be absorbed with minimal disruption. Minimal disruption." We handled everything from federal transport regulations to FDA oversight. That year alone, we had resolved 3 high-risk audit findings. Without my department, Norcross wouldn't just lose contracts, they'd face 6-figure fines. And now, apparently they already were. Because as Ruth poured fresh coffee, she added, "Oh, and I spoke to Patricia last night." My heart jumped. She said Brian called an emergency meeting. 3 clients are already questioning why the compliance department vanished just before major certification renewals. I smiled for the first time in 48 hours. A tight, sharp smile. Good. Let the fire, Brian started, begin to eat the foundation. But this wasn't about vengeance anymore. This was about making sure no one else, James, Sandra, Robert, got buried quietly under Brian Kessler's cost-cutting crusade. And as Ruth pulled out a legal pad and began outlining our strategy, I realized something. This was no longer just a comeback story. It was the beginning of a reckoning. Ruth tapped her pen against the yellow legal pad, her mind already 10 steps ahead. "We need to establish 2 things," she said. "One, that your termination was pretextual, that it wasn't really about restructuring. And 2, that this is a pattern, not just a one-off." I nodded slowly, still absorbing the scale of what she'd uncovered. "We have emails," I said. "We have that spreadsheet targeting high-tenure employees." "Right," she replied. "But we also need to prove that your department wasn't just functional, it was essential, and that removing you created actual risk for Norcross." It didn't take long to list examples. I had dozens. Like the software flaw I caught 3 months ago that would have misclassified thousands of freight records, potentially triggering a federal fine. Or the renegotiated hazmat compliance terms that saved our Jacksonville branch $80,000 last year. Every one of those is documented in the quarterly compliance reports, I said. Ruth leaned forward. "Do you have copies?" "No, Brian's people took everything. My laptop, my hard copies, even my desk calendar." Her expression darkened. "That might work in our favor." "What do you mean?" "Taking your files could be seen as an attempt to destroy evidence, especially if they were trying to suppress your performance documentation. But I have your last 8 annual reviews in my HR archives. I blinked, all of them." She nodded. "Everyone says exceeds expectations. Not a single warning complaint or performance flag." That's when it hit me. Brian had nothing on me. He hadn't fired me for performance, and he couldn't hide behind numbers anymore. All he had was a spreadsheet and a weak excuse about consolidation, and I had something stronger proof. We spent the rest of the weekend organizing everything Ruth had into binders, emails, performance reviews, memos, benefit policy snapshots, and her handwritten notes from board meetings. Every document painted the same picture. Brian Kessler was orchestrating a quiet campaign to eliminate experienced employees before their pensions vested. He wasn't saving the company, he was gutting it. By Sunday night, our dining room looked like a war room. Ruth moved like a woman half her age, fueled by righteous fury and the thrill of justice. We divided tasks. She would continue combing through her HR archives, and I would contact someone Ruth trusted deeply. His name was David Richardson. A labor attorney with 30 years of experience, David had once helped Ruth's former company take down a similar pension dumping scheme. Ruth described him as razor sharp and immune to corporate nonsense. When I spoke to him Monday morning and explained my case, he didn't hesitate. "This is one of the clearest cases of pension manipulation I've seen," he said after reviewing our documents. "You were targeted for financial reasons, not performance. And it's not just you, they're running a playbook." David took the case on contingency. That afternoon, he filed a formal complaint with the Department of Labor, naming Norcross Systems the executive board and CFO Brian Kessler. The charge: wrongful termination, age discrimination, and deliberate obstruction of pension eligibility. But the real bomb dropped on Wednesday morning. Channel 7 Denver's local news station ran the story. "Denver-based software company accused of pension fraud" was the headline. The report included anonymous quotes from a retired HR executive and referenced internal documents suggesting Norcross systematically eliminated employees near retirement. They didn't use my name, but viewers could read between the lines. By Thursday, the Denver Post picked it up. Then it spread to industry blogs, HR forums, and compliance watchdog networks. Employment law experts began weighing in. The phone rang constantly. David called again that afternoon. "3 more former employees have contacted me," he said, "all fired under similar circumstances within 90 days of pension vesting. One of them was James Morrison from IT. He was let go last week," David told me, "exactly 60 days before his vesting date. Then Sandra Williams reached out. She'd just been placed on a performance improvement plan after 12 years of stellar sales. The same pattern. The same script. This was no longer just my fight. This was a class action, and Norcross." They were panicking. Patricia called me in a hushed voice Thursday night. "Teresa, you won't believe this. Brian called an emergency meeting this morning. The compliance department is being reconstituted. Immediately." I blinked. What 3 major clients threatened to pull contracts unless Norcross resolved oversight concerns? And the Morrison audit next week? No one knows how to prepare for it. They're scrambling. I couldn't stop smiling. "And Brian?" I asked. "He looked awful," she said. "The board's asking very pointed questions. Apparently, some of them didn't know the full scope of the terminations or that you were only 27 days from your pension. Some of them didn't know, but at least one of them might have suspected. Because Ruth had mentioned something in passing weeks ago about a quiet board member, a woman named Olivia Shear, whom I'd mentored years ago when she worked in regulatory affairs. We'd stayed loosely in touch. I remembered sending her a recommendation when she transitioned into executive management. I didn't know yet, but Olivia had been watching this unfold, and she wasn't happy. Norcross had burned more than bridges. They'd ignited something far more dangerous, a coalition of smart, seasoned professionals who weren't about to let their legacy be erased. But the firestorm was just beginning, and Norcross hadn't seen the worst yet. Monday morning arrived like thunder. David Richardson called me just after 9 a.m., and I could hear the energy in his voice before he even spoke. "Teresa, we're moving into phase 2, he said. "The Department of Labor is launching a formal investigation into Norcross. They're citing evidence of systemic pension interference and age discrimination." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "And there's more," he added. 3 additional employees contacted us over the weekend. One of them, a former IT director, was let go 2 years ago. But after reading about your story, he believes he was part of the same scheme. This was growing faster than any of us expected. The puzzle pieces were fitting together. Every email, every spreadsheet, every manipulated performance review, they weren't just isolated offenses. They were part of a calculated system of betrayal. David continued. "With these additional cases, this is no longer a single wrongful termination lawsuit. It's evolving into a class action." That word hit hard. Class action. Norcross had gone from a quiet Denver software company to the subject of federal scrutiny and public condemnation in less than 5 days. And we were just getting started. By Tuesday, Channel 7 had aired a follow-up segment. This time they interviewed David Richardson on camera, where he explained pension dumping in plain language. Imagine working 30 years for a company building your retirement and then being fired just days before your pension kicks in, deliberately to save money, he said, steady and precise. It's illegal, unethical, and disturbingly common. The story went viral. LinkedIn exploded with former employees sharing similar experiences. Some even suspected they'd been targeted years earlier, but had never had the proof. The comments were filled with phrases like, "I knew something was off when," and "they did the same thing to my dad." Norcross Systems had officially lost control of the narrative. That Wednesday, Ruth called with a voice that practically sparkled. "Teresa Patricia just told me something you'll want to hear," she said. "Brian tried to hold another all-hands meeting today. Only this time, someone from the board was in the room." I sat forward in my chair. "Olivia," Ruth said. "She's asking questions now, big ones. Apparently she wasn't aware of the details around your termination or the others. She pulled Brian into a private meeting afterward." A slow smile crept across my face. Olivia, the same woman I had mentored over a decade ago. We hadn't spoken recently, but I remembered how determined she'd been even back then to uphold ethics over efficiency. And now she was a board member. Maybe Brian wasn't quite as protected as he thought. That evening, David called again. "They're blinking," he said. "Norcross's legal team reached out. They want a settlement conference." I said nothing for a moment. A settlement meant a check, an admission even if quiet. But this wasn't just about money for me anymore. "This isn't just about me," I finally said. "This is about everyone they tried to erase." David paused. "You want to keep the pressure on?" "Yes," I said. "I want truth, and I want it loud." By Thursday, Richardson had filed amendments to the original complaint, officially converting it into a class action suit. And the headlines followed fast. Norcross Systems facing federal investigation for pension fraud. Former employees accuse CFO of systematic age discrimination, loyalty exploited. Inside a Denver tech firm's secret termination strategy. But perhaps the most satisfying development came late Friday afternoon, when Patricia forwarded me a confidential email that had been accidentally left visible on the shared compliance inbox. It was from Brian, and it was desperation in digital form. "To all board members, we need to resolve the ongoing legal issue quickly and quietly. The public narrative is getting out of control, and several clients have frozen projects, citing reputational risk. The Department of Labor inquiry may take months. We need to consider alternative leadership strategies if we're to regain operational trust." Alternative leadership strategies. Translation. They were considering letting Brian go, the man who had viewed me as a line item, the man who smiled while cutting me off from a lifetime of earned security, the man who believed experience could be replaced by software and spreadsheets. Now he was becoming the very risk he had once claimed to eliminate. And the best part, I hadn't even stepped foot in a courtroom yet. The following week, the tide shifted from storm to reckoning. David called me early Monday morning, his voice steady, almost calm. "Teresa, we've received word. Norcross is requesting an expedited mediation session. Their legal counsel sounded, well, rattled." I raised an eyebrow. "Rattled? They're bleeding clients," he replied. "2 major accounts have officially pulled out. 3 others have frozen payments until the compliance audit backlog is resolved. They're scrambling." I closed my eyes and let that sink in. For 31 years, I had fought to keep Norcross above board, agile, protected, and now the void they had tried to pretend didn't matter was swallowing them whole. David continued, "They've offered a substantial settlement, 7 figures, full pension reinstatement, immediate payout, legal fees, and a public statement acknowledging missteps in restructuring. And the NDA I asked, already knowing the answer. They want it airtight. Gag clause. No admission of wrongdoing, of course. They wanted me to go quietly, again." I looked out the window of my kitchen where the early Colorado light touched the peaks of the Rockies. This house, this life I had built through decades of discipline and dedication. Not flash, not shortcuts, just consistent ethical work. "Decline it," I said. "We're not finished." David didn't argue. The next day, the Department of Labor subpoenaed Norcross's internal communication records, triggered by the evidence we submitted, and the growing number of former employees speaking out. Sandra Williams joined the class action, officially providing a copy of her doctored performance improvement plan, which her new employer had flagged as suspiciously vague. Then came Robert Chen. His termination 2 months earlier had been masked as departmental redundancy, but his job had quietly been refilled by a contractor within weeks. He had proof screenshots of internal system access logs and a whistleblower contact who'd leaked the temp hire agreement. The class action now had 5 plaintiffs. Brian Kessler was no longer just the face of a cost-saving scheme, he was the architect of corporate rot. Channel 7 ran a third special report. This one was different, investigative. They interviewed legal experts, labor rights advocates, and former Norcross clients. One particularly damning quote stood out. Norcross's downfall is a textbook example of what happens when leadership prioritizes short-term optics over long-term integrity. That week, Patricia called with her voice hushed, but electric. "You're not going to believe this." Olivia Shear called an emergency executive board session. The agenda: internal leadership ethics and succession planning. Succession planning. Brian was officially on the chopping block. "I think they're about to oust him," she whispered. I couldn't help it. I laughed, not cruelly, but in that breathless, disbelieving way that comes when justice starts to catch up to betrayal. Ruth and I met the next morning over scones and black coffee in her garden. She'd kept working behind the scenes, quietly supporting other ex-employees, offering media context when journalists needed anonymous insights, and even coordinating with a nonprofit dedicated to whistleblower protection. She looked at me across the table and smiled. "You realize you've done more than fight back," she said. "You've built a blueprint. For everyone who's ever been told to step aside because they're too expensive or past their prime." I nodded, the weight of it finally starting to register. This wasn't just a revenge arc. It was a warning and a way forward. By Thursday, Richardson received the call we'd been waiting for. Norcross's board was offering a New Deal reinstatement of full pension, 7-figure damages, full coverage of legal expenses, and no gag clause. "They're scared this will go federal," David explained. "They want it closed. Cleanly." And Brian, I asked, resigned, effective immediately. Internal memo says he's pursuing other opportunities. Coward. The man who'd looked me in the eye and told me it was nothing personal was now slipping out the backdoor reputation-shredded name attached to headlines he couldn't spin his way out of. The public statement from Norcross was cautious but telling. "We acknowledge that our recent workforce restructuring efforts created unintended consequences for valued long-term employees. We are actively working to improve internal oversight, transparency, and ethical decision-making. But behind the scenes, I knew what had happened. A silent coup. My quiet rebellion had turned into a movement, and the legacy Brian tried to erase, it was now sealed in legal precedent and in the stories of every employee who came forward after I did. But even as the dust settled, one final piece of truth remained, and it had been buried far deeper than I ever imagined. 2 weeks after Norcross's settlement offer was signed and the class action filed with the courts, I received a letter in the mail, a real letter. No logos. No company header, just thick ivory paper folded neatly with my name, written in blue ink across the front. It was from Olivia Shear. Inside was a handwritten note. "Teresa, you may not remember, but 12 years ago you sat across from me in the compliance break room and told me something I never forgot. Quiet strength will outlast flashy ambition." I remembered that line every time someone underestimated me, and especially these last few weeks. "Thank you for what you did, for all of us. Olivia." I read that note 3 times before placing it carefully inside my desk drawer. She had seen it all: the manipulation, the betrayal, the erosion of values from the inside, and she had done something about it, quietly but decisively. Just like I had. Norcross didn't just settle our case. They restructured again, but this time for real. An independent compliance oversight board was created, and all terminations made under Brian's leadership were subject to review. Sandra Williams was offered reinstatement. Robert Chen received a formal apology. James Morrison's family, though still reeling from his job loss, reached out to say thank you for making sure his story mattered. As for Ruth, she's now serving as an advisor for a national nonprofit focused on workplace ethics. She's already helped 2 other former Norcross employees navigate their own legal options. She told me she hasn't felt this purposeful since her early HR days. Me, I didn't go back. When Norcross's board sent a discreet message offering to rehire me as a strategic compliance consultant, I declined. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. I had already done what I came to do. Instead, I joined forces with David and Ruth to speak publicly about pension manipulation. We hosted webinars, spoke at HR conferences, and even contributed to a feature in Fortune titled "The Price of Loyalty: How Quiet Workers Became Corporate Targets and Fought Back." Our case inspired others. By the end of that year, 3 different companies were under review for similar practices. Legislative proposals were introduced to tighten protections for employees nearing retirement eligibility. A fire had been lit and it wasn't going out. But it was a letter I received in December that brought everything full circle. It came from a junior compliance officer at a startup in Austin. She had followed the Norcross case from day one. Her note ended with this: "I used to think being quiet meant being overlooked. Now I understand it means being underestimated, and that's not a weakness. It's a weapon. Thank you." I cried reading that. Not because I was sad, but because, for the first time in a long time, I felt something bigger than anger or vindication. I felt peace. My name is Teresa Langford. I'm 59 years old. And after 31 years of loyal service, they tried to write me off as an expense. What they didn't realize was that I was never just a number in their ledger. I was the foundation they stood on. And when they tried to pull me out from under them, I didn't just survive, I rose. Have you ever been underestimated by those closest to you or discarded after years of loyalty? Tell your story in the comments. And if you believe in standing up against silent betrayal, like and subscribe. Let's make sure the quiet ones are heard loud and clear.